From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I've come to Tasmania today for one purpose, and that's to say to the people of Tasmania that the nation is standing with them at this very, very difficult time. We'll be standing with them in every way.
Australia is on fire. With a second week of record-shattering heat, 2 new colors have been added to Australia's weather maps to show temperatures exceeding 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Wildfires rage through 5 of Australia's 6 states. Meanwhile, the United States records its hottest year ever. We'll go to Australia for a report. As 3 men of Somali descent are arraigned in New York, President Obama continues the controversial practice of rendition, secretly detaining, transporting, and holding prisoners overseas. And part 2 of our exclusive interview with Sami Al-Haj, the Al Jazeera journalist imprisoned and tortured at Guantanamo for 6 years.
When I was in Guantanamo, I asked myself, it's a bad situation, but I asked myself, maybe it is a good chance for me to be a journalist inside Guantanamo, to see the situation there and to be a witness of that section, about that things. And when I get my release, I will tell the outside people about that thing.
We speak with the Al Jazeera journalist at Al Jazeera headquarters in Doha, Qatar. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. New figures have confirmed 2012 was the hottest year on record for the continental United States. On Tuesday, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced an average temperature for 2012 of 55.3 degrees, 1 degree above the previous record and 3.2 degrees more than the 20th century average. Temperatures were above normal in every month between June 2011 and September 2012. A 16-month stretch that has not occurred since the government began keeping track in 1895. Among a number of other milestones, 2012 also saw the second most extreme weather on record. The news comes as across the globe, Australia is dealing with record-shattering heat. We'll go to Australia for more on the story after headlines. The Obama administration's launched a review of offshore oil drilling in the Arctic following a cascading series of blunders and mishaps by the oil giant Shell. Shell's recent troubles culminated when its drill rig ran aground last week off the Alaskan coast, sparking concerns of a potential spill. Past problems have included safety and environmental violations on its vessels and the failure during a test of a device meant to control a gushing well. Government officials say the new 60-day review could potentially limit or halt Shell's ambitions for Arctic drilling. The escalating issues have followed repeated warnings by environmental groups that Shell's unprepared for the harsh and dangerous conditions associated with Arctic drilling. Dan Howells of Greenpeace told the New York Times, quote, "We've repeatedly been told Shell's the best in the business, and so we can only conclude after the series of mishaps that the best in the business is simply not good enough for the Arctic." The Coast Guard has launched a separate investigation into the grounding of Shell's drill rig last week. Alleged U.S. Army whistleblower Bradley Manning has had his potential sentence reduced should he be convicted for the leaking of classified documents to WikiLeaks. On Tuesday, the judge overseeing Manning's pretrial hearing said Manning's entitled to 112 days less in prison due to the unlawful conditions of his imprisonment at Marine Corps Brig in Quantico, Virginia. Manning's ordeal included being held in a 6-by-8-foot cell for at least 23 hours a day and being banned from lying down or even leaning against the wall unless he was sleeping. His attorney had argued his imprisonment was so harsh and inhumane that either his charges should be dropped or he should be given 10 times credit for the 9 months he spent there and any sentence he may receive. In her ruling, Judge Denise Lind agreed with the allegations of unlawful abuse, but said Manning will only get 1-to-1 credit and reduction of any sentence. In a statement, the Bradley Manning Support Network said, quote, "The ruling confirms Bradley was mistreated and vindicates the massive protest effect that was required to stop the Marines at Quantico from torturing him. Yet 112 days is not nearly enough to hold the military accountable for their actions," they said. A U.S. military contractor has agreed to pay a more than $5 million settlement to 71 former prisoners who suffered torture at the notorious Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. Agility Holdings, formerly known as L3 Services, and before that Titan Corporation, becomes the first U.S. corporation involved in the abuses at Abu Ghraib to compensate its victims, 8 years after the scandal first broke. Filed in 2008, the suit accused Agility of, quote, permitting scores of its employees to participate in torturing and abusing prisoners over an extended period of time throughout Iraq. One of the plaintiffs, an Iraqi farmer, alleges he was caged, beaten, threatened with dogs, and given electric shocks during the more than 4 years in U.S. detention. A case against another contractor, CACI, or CACI, is set to go to trial later this year. The Obama administration's left open the possibility of removing all U.S. troops from Afghanistan once combat operations end in 2014. On Tuesday, Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes told reporters the White House has not ruled out a zero-option policy rather than other proposals to leave up to 20,000 troops behind. President Obama scheduled to discuss post-2014 troop levels with Afghan President Hamid Karzai later this week. The United Nations World Food Program continues to warn it's been unable to meet the demands of the millions of Syrians who require assistance. The UN is currently feeding some 1.5 million people in Syria, but around 2.5 million are believed to be in need. On Tuesday, a spokesperson for UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said aid workers have been able to reach less than half of those requiring food aid.
Humanitarian partners continue to reach hundreds of thousands of people in Syria, despite insecurity, attacks, road closures, fuel shortages, and lack of access to conflict-affected areas. Since the beginning of January, the World Food Programme has reached 800,000 people, and it says that it hopes to reach 1.5 million people with food distributions in Syria this month. It is estimated that 2.5 million people are in need of food assistance in Syria.
Venezuela's delayed the third-term swearing-in ceremony of President Hugo Chavez as he continues to receive medical treatment in Cuba. Chavez has been in Cuba for nearly a month, undergoing and recovering from his 4th surgery for cancer. On Tuesday, the head of Venezuela's National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, confirmed Chavez is not well enough to make it back in time for Thursday's swearing-in.
The Commander-President has asked us to inform you that in accordance with the recommendations of the medical team that is taking care of re-establishing his health, the process of post-operative recovery will extend further than January 10th of this year. Because of this, he will not be able to appear on that day in front of the National Assembly.
The delay has sparked a heated dispute between the Venezuelan government and the political opposition, with Chavez's foes arguing Cabello should assume the presidency as head of the National Assembly should Chavez fail to be sworn in. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is reportedly preparing to unveil today what's being described as one of the toughest gun control laws in the country. The measure reportedly includes new restrictions on assault weapons, harsher sentences for gun crimes, and limits on the capacities of ammunition magazines. Former Democratic Congress member Gabrielle Giffords of Arizona, meanwhile, has announced a new initiative to take on gun violence. Giffords suffered major head injuries and nearly lost her life in the Tucson shooting rampage that killed 6 people in 2011. On Tuesday, the 2-year anniversary of her shooting, Giffords and her husband, Mark Kelly, announced a new group called Americans for Responsible Solutions, which they said will raise the funds necessary to balance the influence of the gun lobby. Writing in USA Today, Kelly and Giffords said that in the aftermath of the Newtown massacre in Connecticut, quote, "We can't just hope that the last shooting tragedy will prevent the next. Achieving reforms to reduce gun violence and prevent mass shootings will mean matching gun lobbyists in their reach and resources," they wrote. The insurance giant American International Group, or AIG, is sparking outrage over reports it's considering joining a shareholders' lawsuit against the U.S. government. AIG's board is said to be weighing whether to join former CEO Maurice Greenberg in accusing the U.S. government of shortchanging investors and violating their Fifth Amendment rights in the company's 2008 bailout. The move comes just 2 weeks after AIG finally repaid the $182 billion in federal money it received to keep it from collapse. Greenberg himself has come under wide criticism for running AIG when it helped create many of the complex financial instruments that caused the current economic collapse. In a statement, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts said, quote, Taxpayers across this country saved AIG from ruin, and it would be outrageous for this company to turn around and sue the federal government because they think the deal was not generous enough. AIG should thank American taxpayers for their help, not bite the hand that fed them for helping them out in a crisis. A new report says the Obama administration spent more money on immigration enforcement in the past fiscal year than it did on all other federal law enforcement agencies combined. The Migration Policy Institute says the U.S. spent about $18 billion on immigration enforcement programs, surpassing the combined budgets of the FBI, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms and Explosives, Drug Enforcement Administration, and Secret Service. The number of criminal prosecutions for immigration-related violations, meanwhile, has skyrocketed in the past decade, now accounting for more than half of all criminal prosecutions at the federal level. The report's authors conclude immigration is now the Obama administration's top law enforcement priority. Illinois is set to become the latest state to allow undocumented immigrants to obtain driver's licenses. Governor Pat Quinn has pledged to sign a new bill that will allow about 250,000 immigrants to become licensed drivers. Only Washington and New Mexico currently allow licenses for undocumented people, while Utah allows driving permits. Connecticut recently announced young immigrants who qualify for the Obama administration's Deferred Action Program can apply for driver's licenses. A federal judge in Manhattan has dealt a major setback to the New York police tactic known as stop-and-frisk. On Tuesday, Judge Shira Scheindlin of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York ruled police are not allowed to routinely stop pedestrians outside of private residential buildings in the Bronx. The so-called Clean Halls program has prompted allegations of police harassment by residents who say they're being accosted outside the buildings in which they live. In a statement for the Center for Constitutional Rights, they said, quote, "The stops held unconstitutional today are part of a pattern of unconstitutional NYPD stops in all boroughs that have disrupted the lives of New Yorkers, particularly Black and Latino New Yorkers, for over a decade," said CCR. And the LGBTQ rights activist Jean Manford has died at the age of 92. Manford founded the group PFLAG, Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. In 1972, Manford made headlines after denouncing police for failing to protect her gay son when he was attacked at a protest of the Gay Activists Alliance. In a letter to the New York Post, Manford wrote at the time, quote, "I have a homosexual son, and I love him." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.
Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.